It was a quiet evening in the city, the kind of evening where the noise of the world settles just enough for your thoughts to catch up with you. Maria sat alone on a park bench, her fingers tracing the spine of a book she hadn't opened. Around her, people moved, couples holding hands, joggers focused on their rhythm, children laughing as they chased each other in the distance. But for Maria, the world felt strangely still, as if she existed in a pocket of silence amidst the chaos. She had just experienced rejection, and the pain of it clung to her like a shadow. But it wasn't the rejection itself that haunted her. It was something deeper, something darker. The kind of ache that doesn't merely bruise your heart, but leaves a mark on your sense of self. Maria had loved deeply, unguarded and vulnerable. She had given her time, her laughter, her trust, and in return, she was met with indifference. The rejection wasn't dramatic. There were no harsh words, no cruel dismissal. It came in the form of quiet apathy, an unspoken message that her love, her efforts, and her existence didn't matter as much as she thought they did. And that was the part that cut the deepest. Not the rejection itself, but the nagging question it left behind. Was she not enough? Had she been too much? The uncertainty wrapped around her like a fog, suffocating and relentless. It's a peculiar thing about rejection. On the surface, it feels like a clear and definitive moment. Someone saying no, choosing something else, or walking away. But the pain doesn't stop there. It burrows into the cracks of your mind, feeding on insecurities you didn't even know you had. It whispers doubts in the quiet hours of the night and twists memories until you start questioning everything. Did they ever care? Were the moments of connection real? And worst of all, was it your fault? Rejection opens a door to a labyrinth of self-doubt, and it's easy to lose yourself in its winding corridors. Maria tried to shake the thoughts, to remind herself of what she had learned about Stoicism and resilience. But as the days turned into weeks, she began to notice something peculiar. The pain of rejection wasn't constant. It ebbed and flowed, fading into the background, only to resurface in unexpected ways. Sometimes it was a memory triggered by a familiar song. Other times, it was the sight of a stranger who bore a passing resemblance to the person who had hurt her. And every time, it wasn't just the rejection she felt. It was the humiliation, the sense of being unseen, unvalued, unworthy. These were the things that lingered, the wounds that didn't close easily. If this message resonated with you and sparked a moment of clarity, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more empowering content like this. Your support helps us create more deep dives into the truths of life and human psychology. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, and let's keep growing stronger together. What hurts more than rejection itself is this: the way it forces you to confront your deepest fears about yourself. Rejection is like a mirror held up to your vulnerabilities, reflecting every flaw, every insecurity, every unhealed wound you've carried with you. It taps into the primal need we all have to belong, to be valued, to matter. And when someone rejects us, it can feel like a confirmation of our worst suspicions, that we are, in some way, fundamentally flawed or unlovable. But here's the paradox, the twist that Stoicism and dark human psychology can help us understand. The pain of rejection is not a reflection of your worth, but of your humanity. To feel hurt is to care, and to care is to live authentically. What Maria was grappling with, and what we all grapple with in the face of rejection, is not just the loss of someone else's affection or approval, but the challenge of seeing ourselves clearly in its absence. Rejection forces us to strip away illusions, not just about the other person, but about ourselves. And so, as Maria sat on that bench, letting the cool evening breeze carry her thoughts, she realized something profound. The pain wasn't just something to endure, it was something to examine, to understand, to learn from. The hurt she felt wasn't her enemy, it was a teacher, revealing truths she had been too distracted to see before. It wasn't about him, or even about what she had lost. It was about her, and what she was ready to discover about herself. Number 1. The silent wound, the pain of being unseen. It was a rainy afternoon when Liam stood by the window, watching droplets race each other down the glass pane. His phone sat silent on the table beside him, its blank screen a quiet reminder of what he had been hoping for. Days had passed since he reached out to someone he thought understood him, someone he believed valued his presence. Yet there was no response, just silence. It wasn't the rejection of his message that lingered in his chest, like a dull ache. It was something deeper. It was the unspoken realization that he had become invisible to someone he once held dear. To feel unseen, as though his existence had slipped into irrelevance, hurt far more than the rejection itself. Epictetus once said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." Yet in moments like these, when the sting of being unseen strikes, even the strongest can falter. Rejection is often loud and definitive, but the pain of being unseen is insidious, creeping in through the cracks of our psyche. It speaks to a primal human need, the need to be acknowledged, valued, and understood. When that is denied, it feels as though the ground beneath us shifts, leaving us untethered and questioning our worth. The silent wound of being unseen is particularly devastating because it attacks our core identity. Humans are social creatures, wired to seek connection and validation. From the earliest days of civilization, being acknowledged within the tribe was not just desirable, it was essential for survival. To be ignored or cast aside was synonymous with danger and isolation. While modern life no longer ties our survival to social inclusion in such stark terms, the emotional scars of disconnection remain. When someone fails to see us, to truly see us, it stirs ancient fears of abandonment and insignificance. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." This wisdom is a beacon in the face of the silent wound. The pain of being unseen isn't about the other person's actions or inactions. It's about our response to their disregard. Stoicism invites us to shift our focus inward, to question why the opinions or actions of others have such power over our self-perception. Why do we allow someone's inability to see us to cloud the way we see ourselves? The answer lies in the complex layers of human psychology. When we invest emotionally in someone, whether it's a partner, a friend, or even a dream, we unconsciously tie a part of our identity to how they perceive us. Their acknowledgement becomes a mirror in which we seek our own reflection. But when that mirror is turned away, the void left behind feels like an assault on our very existence. It's not their rejection that wounds us, it's the vacuum of their indifference. We feel as though we've ceased to matter, not just to them, but in some existential way. In Stoic thought, there's a concept of indifference to externals. This doesn't mean we should suppress our emotions or pretend that rejection or invisibility doesn't hurt. Instead, it's a call to recognize that the validation we seek outside ourselves is fleeting and unreliable. Seneca famously said, "A man is as unhappy as he has convinced himself he is." The pain of being unseen is often amplified by our internal narrative. We tell ourselves stories about what the silence means, stories of inadequacy, failure, or unworthiness. These stories, not the act of being unseen itself, become the source of our deepest suffering. For Liam, the silence of his phone wasn't just about a missed reply, it was a cascade of questions and doubts. Did he matter less than he thought? Had his presence always been this easy to overlook? These questions, while painful, were also an opportunity. Stoicism teaches us that adversity is a test of character, a chance to build resilience and self-awareness. Liam could choose to let the pain define him, or he could use it as a mirror, not one held by someone else, but one reflecting his own strength and value. The silent wound of being unseen challenges us to confront our fears and insecurities head-on. It forces us to ask uncomfortable but necessary questions. Why does this person's acknowledgement hold so much weight? What does their silence reveal about them, and what does my reaction reveal about me? These questions, though difficult, can become the foundation for growth. They remind us that our worth is not diminished by someone else's failure to recognize it. Marcus Aurelius also wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." The pain of being unseen is an impediment, but it is also a teacher. It shows us where we've placed too much power in the hands of others and invites us to reclaim it. It's a reminder to anchor our self-worth in something unshakable, our own understanding of who we are. As the rain eased and the clouds parted, Liam picked up his phone and put it away. The silence was still there, but it no longer carried the same weight. He realized that being unseen by another didn't mean he was invisible. His presence, his value, and his essence were still intact, waiting for him to acknowledge them. And in that moment, the silent wound began to heal, not through anyone else's validation, but through his own decision to see himself clearly. Stoicism, he realized, wasn't just a philosophy. It was a lifeline in the quietest, darkest moments of the human experience. Number 2. Self-doubt. The inner critic amplified. It was late at night and Jacob found himself staring at the ceiling of his dimly lit room. The rejection he'd faced earlier that day wasn't particularly dramatic, just a polite no, wrapped in a smile. Yet, as the hours stretched on, that simple no morphed into something far more sinister in his mind. It wasn't just about the opportunity he'd lost. It was about what the rejection seemed to say about him. His thoughts spiraled, each one sharper than the last. Maybe I wasn't good enough. Maybe I never will be. Maybe they saw something in me that even I don't want to face. This is the cruel aftermath of rejection, the inner critic coming to life, loud and relentless. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." But in moments like these, that power feels elusive. The sting of rejection often isn't in the event itself, but in how it amplifies the whispers of self-doubt already lurking in the shadows of our minds. Rejection feels personal, even when it's not meant to be. A job interview that doesn't go your way, a romantic interest who chooses someone else, or even a friend who drifts apart. All these moments carry the potential to make us question our worth. And the inner critic? It seizes the opportunity with glee. It twists the knife, turning a single event into a sweeping indictment of your entire character. Maybe you're not smart enough, talented enough, attractive enough, it says. It convinces you that the rejection isn't about circumstances or compatibility, but about your fundamental inadequacy. Seneca, another great Stoic thinker, reminds us, We suffer more often in imagination than in reality. This is especially true when it comes to rejection. The initial pain of the no is fleeting, like a passing storm. But the stories we tell ourselves about that rejection, the narratives our inner critic spins, those are what cause the real suffering. Instead of seeing rejection as an isolated event, we let it take root in our identity. We allow it to define us in ways that are neither fair nor true. Jacob's inner critic didn't just stop at this one rejection. It dug up every past failure, every embarrassing moment, every fear he'd ever had about himself. The rejection became a magnifying glass, intensifying every perceived flaw. This is the dark side of human psychology. Our minds are wired to focus on threats, and rejection feels like a threat to our very sense of self. It's not just, "I wasn't chosen this time." It's, "I'll never be chosen. I'm fundamentally unworthy." But here's where Stoicism offers a way out of the spiral. The Stoics understood that our minds are both our greatest strength and our greatest challenge. Epictetus famously said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." The inner critic thrives on our unexamined reactions, on our willingness to believe every harsh word it whispers. But what if we chose not to believe it? What if we treated rejection not as a mirror reflecting our flaws, but as a neutral event, one that says more about the situation than it does about us? To do this, we must confront the inner critic with the same resilience we would summon against an external enemy. When the voice in your head says, "You're not good enough," respond with, "Good enough for what? By whose standards?" When it insists, "You'll never succeed," counter with, "The future is unwritten, and this one moment doesn't define it." This isn't about blind positivity or ignoring reality. It's about refusing to let an imagined narrative take control of your life. For Jacob, this realization came slowly. One night, as he sat with his thoughts, he remembered something he'd read about Stoicism. When you arise in the morning, think of what a privilege it is to be alive, to think, to enjoy, to love. The rejection hadn't taken away those privileges. It hadn't taken away his ability to try again, to learn, to grow. And if the rejection hadn't taken those things, then it hadn't truly diminished him at all. Rejection, at its core, is an external event. It's a result of circumstances, choices, and dynamics that are often beyond our control. The Stoics teach us to focus only on what is within our control: our thoughts, our actions, and our interpretations. When we let rejection feed our inner critic, we're giving control over to something outside ourselves. We're allowing an external event to dictate our internal state. But when we choose to see rejection as neutral, neither a personal failure nor a defining moment, we reclaim that control. Self-doubt is a natural response to rejection, but it doesn't have to be a lasting one. The inner critic thrives on unchecked power, but it weakens the moment you challenge it with reason, perspective, and self-compassion. Jacob began to see his rejection not as a verdict on his worth, but as a moment of redirection. He remembered that every no carries within it the possibility of a yes, a door closing so another can open. And while the sting of rejection didn't disappear overnight, it lost its power to define him. In the end, rejection hurts because it forces us to face the parts of ourselves we'd rather ignore. But Stoicism reminds us that we have the tools to face that pain with courage and clarity. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." Rejection is not the end of the road. It's part of the journey. And the inner critic? It's just another obstacle, one that can be overcome with the right mindset and the steady strength of self-awareness. Number 3. The loss of illusions. Mourning what never was. It had been months since Sarah last spoke to him, but the memories still clung to her like smoke in a sealed room. She had built a world around him, a world of shared dreams, unspoken promises, and a future that now seemed almost absurd in its fragility. They had talked endlessly about the life they would create together, the places they would visit, the plans they would bring to life. And then, with a single conversation, it all unraveled. His words weren't angry or cruel, but they were final. He didn't see her as part of his future. It was over. What hurt Sarah most wasn't just the loss of him. It was the loss of everything she thought they could be. Epictetus once said, "It is not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." Yet Sarah couldn't help but feel overwhelmed by what felt like the death of a dream. Stoicism teaches us to focus on what is within our control, but in the face of rejection, there is often something intangible, something deeply personal that lingers. This is the loss of illusions, the mourning of what never was. It is a peculiar kind of grief, one that doesn't stem from losing a tangible reality, but from having to confront the truth that the reality you envisioned was never meant to be. The human mind is a powerful architect of illusions. We build castles of expectation, brick by brick, out of moments that feel significant. A shared laugh becomes the foundation for trust. A fleeting compliment turns into a cornerstone of mutual admiration. Every interaction, every glance, every word is infused with meaning that supports the vision we've constructed. When rejection comes, it doesn't just dismantle the relationship or opportunity, it demolishes the intricate structure of meaning we've created. What hurts more than the rejection itself is watching that vision crumble and realizing we have to let go of a future we had already begun to live in our minds. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Yet, this strength often feels elusive when faced with the loss of illusions. The pain of what could have been can weigh heavier than what actually was. In Sarah's case, she wasn't just mourning the end of a relationship. She was grieving the vacations they would never take, the home they would never share, the milestones they would never celebrate. These imagined realities had become part of her identity, and now she was left with an emptiness where those dreams had once lived. This loss is compounded by the mind's relentless tendency to replay moments, searching for signs that the illusion could have been salvaged. We think back to things we said, choices we made, and wonder if we could have changed the outcome. But Stoicism reminds us that the past is beyond our control, and agonizing over it only deepens our suffering. Seneca's words echo this truth. What is to come hangs in uncertainty. Live immediately. To mourn what never was is to anchor ourselves in that uncertainty, chaining our minds to a vision of a life that was never ours to begin with. What makes this pain darker, more insidious, is how it forces us to confront our own vulnerability. To lose an illusion is to recognize that we allowed ourselves to believe in something that wasn't real. It feels like a betrayal, not by the other person, but by ourselves. We question our judgment, our instincts, and our ability to discern what is true from what is imagined. This self-doubt can spiral, making us feel smaller, weaker, and more uncertain of the world around us. But there is power in this recognition, a stoic clarity that emerges when we allow ourselves to see things as they are. The loss of illusions, while painful, is also an opportunity to recalibrate our perspective. As Epictetus advised, first, Say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. The collapse of our imagined future forces us to ask hard questions. Who am I without this vision? What do I truly want? And how do I build a future that is grounded in reality rather than fantasy? In Sarah's case, she began to find solace in the small, undeniable truths of her life. She still loved morning coffee by the window, the sound of rain on the roof, the way a good book could transport her to another world. These were things that rejection couldn't take from her, pieces of her life that remained solid amidst the ruins of her imagined future. Slowly, she started to rebuild, not a castle of illusions, but a foundation of resilience. Stoicism teaches us that suffering often comes from our attachment to things outside our control. The loss of illusions is a lesson in letting go of these attachments. It's not about erasing the pain, but about understanding its source and finding the strength to move forward despite it. Marcus Aurelius's wisdom offers a path. Reject your sense of injury, and the injury itself disappears. By accepting the truth of what is, rather than clinging to what could have been, we free ourselves from the weight of illusions. In the end, what hurts more than rejection itself is the story we tell ourselves about what rejection means. It's the loss of a narrative we thought was ours to write, the realization that the pen was never fully in our hands. But this realization can also be liberating. When we mourn the loss of illusions, we clear space for something new, something real, unburdened by fantasy or false expectations. And in that space, we find not just strength, but a quiet, unshakable peace. Number 4, the fear of social judgment, rejection as a public mirror. It was a moment Sarah couldn't shake. She sat in her car after being passed over for a promotion at work, staring blankly at the dashboard. It wasn't just the rejection itself that haunted her. It was the lingering thought of her co-workers' reactions. Were they pitying her, judging her, laughing behind her back? Every imagined scenario played out in her mind, each one sharper and more painful than the last. The rejection had struck her pride, but the fear of social judgment burned even deeper, leaving her grappling with questions that extended far beyond her career. "What will they think of me now?" she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "We all love ourselves more than other people, but care more about their opinion than our own." This paradox, which resides at the heart of human nature, is one of the cruelest truths about rejection. It's not just the event that wounds us, it's the story we tell ourselves about how others perceive it. Social judgment feels like a magnifying glass over our failures, distorting them into something much larger and more permanent than they are. In Sarah's case, it wasn't just the loss of the promotion that hurt, it was the sense of being publicly diminished in the eyes of her peers. Rejection as a public mirror reveals a deep vulnerability in all of us, the need to belong and to be valued within a community. In ancient times, this need was a matter of survival. Being ostracized or rejected by the group could mean death, and while the modern world no longer operates on such stark terms, our biology hasn't caught up. The sting of rejection carries with it echoes of those primal fears, making us feel as though social judgment threatens our very sense of existence. Seneca, another Stoic philosopher, understood this psychological burden. He advised, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." In moments of rejection, it's not the event itself that weighs us down, but the imagined consequences, those endless spirals of what ifs, and they must think I'm... These thoughts can consume us, giving rejection a power it doesn't inherently have. Sarah's co-workers may have briefly noted her situation before moving on with their lives, yet in her mind, she became the subject of constant scrutiny, her rejection a beacon of failure for everyone to see. What makes this fear so painful is its intimacy. Social judgment feels like a betrayal of the self, as if the people around us have a window into our deepest insecurities. We project onto them the things we secretly fear about ourselves. Sarah, who doubted her abilities long before the promotion opportunity arose, assumed her co-workers now shared that doubt. This projection turned her rejection into a confirmation of her worst fears, even though the reality may have been far from it. Stoicism offers a liberating perspective on this struggle. Epictetus famously said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." The fear of social judgment thrives on our reactions. We give it life by assuming others are focused on our failures when, in truth, most people are too preoccupied with their own lives to dwell on ours. Stoicism teaches us to shift our focus inward, to judge ourselves by our values and efforts rather than the fleeting opinions of others. When we do this, rejection loses much of its sting, becoming an event to learn from rather than a reflection of our worth. But this is easier said than done. The pull of social judgment is powerful because it taps into our desire for connection and validation. After all, isn't it human to want to be liked, respected, and admired? The challenge lies in recognizing that these desires, while natural, are also a trap if we allow them to dictate our self-perception. Rejection becomes unbearable not because it's inherently devastating, but because we attach our sense of self-worth to how we think others see us. The Stoics understood this trap and emphasized the importance of internal validation. As Marcus Aurelius put it, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Sarah's journey to understanding this truth wasn't immediate. For weeks, she avoided the office break room, fearful of the looks and whispers she imagined. But one afternoon, she stumbled across a passage from Epictetus. "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." It was a shocking idea at first, but as she mulled it over, she realized how much of her pain came from trying to control how others saw her. She couldn't change their opinions, but she could change her own reaction. This shift in perspective didn't erase her disappointment, but it dulled the sharp edges of her fear. She began to focus on what she could control: her work, her attitude, and her commitment to personal growth. Over time, Sarah learned that the fear of social judgment is a hollow threat. The truth is, most people are far too consumed by their own fears and failures to spend much time scrutinizing yours. The public mirror of rejection is often an illusion, a projection of our own insecurities rather than an accurate reflection of others' opinions. Stoicism teaches us to break this illusion by anchoring ourselves in what truly matters: our values, efforts, and the clarity of knowing that our worth is not up for debate. Rejection hurts, but the fear of social judgment can make it unbearable if we let it. By adopting a Stoic mindset, we can strip away the unnecessary layers of pain and focus on what rejection has to teach us about resilience and self-respect. The opinions of others will always be outside our control, but as the Stoics remind us, our response is where our true power lies. Sarah found her strength not in silencing the voices she feared, but in realizing they were never as loud or important as she made them out to be. In the end, the most profound freedom comes not from escaping social judgment, but from no longer needing to fear it. Number 5. The emptiness of disconnection, losing a part of yourself. It was the kind of quiet moment where the world seems to pause. Alex sat in his living room, the dim light casting shadows on walls that felt emptier than ever before. The breakup had been weeks ago, but the silence that now filled the space wasn't just in the room, it was inside him. He stared at his phone, resisting the urge to text her, to send one last message that might bridge the gap between them. But deep down, he knew she was gone, and along with her departure came an ache that was hard to define. It wasn't just about missing her, it was about the hollow feeling that he couldn't quite shake, the sense that a part of him had vanished with her. This is the emptiness of disconnection, the feeling of losing a part of yourself when someone leaves. It is a unique kind of pain, one that transcends the rejection itself and burrows into the core of your being. Seneca, the Stoic philosopher, once said, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality, and yet, in the aftermath of rejection, the imagination becomes a battleground. We replay moments, question decisions, and confront the stark reality that the connection we once leaned on is no longer there. The silence left behind becomes deafening, and it feels as though the very fabric of who we are has unraveled. The reason this pain is so profound lies in the way humans connect. We don't merely interact with others, we entwine parts of ourselves with them. Their presence becomes integrated into our routines, our thoughts, and even our identity. When that connection is severed, it's as though a piece of ourselves has been cut away. Marcus Aurelius, another great Stoic, reminds us in his Meditations, "Everything that happens, happens as it should." But in the throes of disconnection, this wisdom feels distant. Instead, we are left grappling with the void, questioning not just the relationship, but ourselves. What makes this emptiness so unbearable is its paradoxical nature. The more we try to fill it, by reaching out, by distracting ourselves, or by clinging to memories, the larger it seems to grow. Epictetus teaches us, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." And yet, reacting to the void feels almost impossible. It pulls at the edges of your consciousness, demanding to be felt, even as you try to push it away. This is the dark psychology of disconnection, the way it forces you to confront not just the loss of the other person, but the loss of the version of yourself that existed with them. In Alex's case, the emptiness showed up in unexpected ways. It wasn't just the absence of her laughter or the goodnight texts. It was the little things, the way her favorite coffee mug still sat on the counter, or how he'd instinctively pick up his phone to share a joke, only to remember there was no one to send it to. These small, everyday moments were where the pain hid, catching him off guard and pulling him back into the ache of disconnection. He realized that her departure had created a void, not just in his life, but in his sense of who he was. Without her, he felt unmoored, like a ship adrift without an anchor. This is where Stoicism offers a lifeline. The Stoics believed in the importance of understanding and accepting the nature of life, even its most painful aspects. They taught that suffering comes not from the events themselves, but from our judgments about them. Alex began to reflect on this, asking himself whether his pain was truly about her absence, or if it was about the way he had allowed their relationship to define him. He realized that part of the emptiness he felt was rooted in his own reliance on the connection to give his life meaning. The journey to confront the emptiness of disconnection is not easy, but it is transformative. Stoicism doesn't ask us to suppress our feelings or pretend the void doesn't exist. Instead, it encourages us to sit with the discomfort, to observe it without judgment, and to use it as a tool for self-discovery. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. For Alex, this meant acknowledging the emptiness without letting it consume him. It meant recognizing that while the connection was gone, he still remained whole and capable of rebuilding. The dark human psychology of this emptiness lies in its ability to make us feel as though we are less than we were before. It whispers that we are incomplete, that the best parts of us are tied to the person who left. But Stoicism flips this narrative on its head. It reminds us that we are not defined by our connections, but by how we rise when those connections falter. The void is not a sign of weakness, it is an invitation to rediscover our own strength. In time, Alex found solace not in trying to fill the emptiness, but in embracing it. He began to see it not as a loss, but as a space for growth. The part of him that felt missing wasn't gone. It was simply waiting to be reclaimed, to be nurtured independently of the relationship that once sustained it. And with this realization came a quiet peace, the kind that Stoicism speaks of. The emptiness of disconnection had taught him one of life's hardest lessons, that while relationships shape us, they do not define us. As Alex sat on his couch weeks later, he felt the echoes of the void still there, but they no longer controlled him. Instead, they had become a part of his story, a reminder of his resilience. He thought of another teaching from Epictetus. He who is not happy with little will never be happy with more. And he understood that the emptiness wasn't something to escape. It was something to accept, to learn from, and ultimately to grow beyond. Number 6. The opportunity for growth. Pain as a Stoic teacher. It was late at night, and the city was silent except for the occasional hum of passing cars. Daniel sat alone on his balcony, staring at the empty sky. The silence felt heavy, pressing against his chest, as the words from earlier that day echoed in his mind. I just don't feel the same way anymore. Rejected, discarded, left wondering if he had ever truly mattered. But as he sat there, wrestling with the weight of rejection, a phrase he had read in a book on Stoicism surfaced in his thoughts, like a faint light in the darkness. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. These words by Marcus Aurelius hinted at something profound, that even pain, if understood, could become a tool for growth. Rejection, Daniel realized, wasn't the enemy. The real challenge was how he chose to respond to it. Stoicism teaches us that external events are beyond our control, but our reactions to them are entirely within our power. In the context of rejection, this principle takes on a transformative meaning. The hurt we feel, the self-doubt that creeps in, and the overwhelming urge to question our worth. These are natural responses. But what happens next? That's where the Stoics' wisdom comes into play. As Seneca once said, difficulties strengthen the mind, as labor does the body. Rejection, then, is not a sentence to despair, but an opportunity to build inner resilience. The pain of rejection can feel all-encompassing, like a storm that won't pass. It makes us question everything, our choices, our value, our future. But if we step back, as Epictetus encourages, and observe the situation with clarity, we begin to see the lesson hidden within the pain. Men are disturbed not by things, but by the views they take of them, he wrote. Rejection itself is a neutral event. It's our interpretation of it, our belief that it defines us, diminishes us, that causes suffering. The Stoic practice of detachment invites us to separate the event from our emotional reaction, to recognize that while rejection may sting, it doesn't have the power to diminish our inherent worth. In Daniel's case, the The rejection felt like a mirror reflecting his worst fears, that he wasn't enough, that he had failed in some fundamental way. But instead of spiraling further, he decided to sit with the pain, to observe it without judgment. It wasn't easy. Nothing about facing rejection is. But as the days turned into weeks, he began to notice something. The pain was no longer a constant weight. It had become a signal, pointing to areas of his life he hadn't examined closely before. He realized he had tied his self-worth too tightly to the approval of others, leaving himself vulnerable to the shifting tides of their opinions. Rejection had exposed this vulnerability, not as a flaw, but as an area for growth. Stoicism teaches that pain is a teacher. The hurt we feel isn't there to punish us, it's there to guide us. Marcus Aurelius reminds us, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." For Daniel, this meant reframing rejection as a tool for self-discovery. Instead of asking, "Why wasn't I enough for them?" he began to ask, "What can I learn about myself from this experience?" This shift in perspective didn't erase the pain, but it gave it purpose. It transformed rejection from a dead end into a stepping stone. One of the most challenging aspects of rejection is the sense of loss it brings, whether it's the loss of a relationship, an opportunity, or an idea of the future. The void left behind can feel unbearable. But here too, Stoicism offers guidance. The concept of amor fati, love of fate, encourages us to embrace everything that happens, even the painful parts, as necessary pieces of our journey. A blazing fire makes flame and brightness out of everything that is thrown into it, Marcus Aurelius writes. What if rejection isn't a sign of failure, but a necessary step toward becoming who we are meant to be? What if it's refining us, shaping us into something stronger? Daniel began to understand this as he reflected on his life. He realized that rejection had forced him to confront truths he had been avoiding, about his fears, his attachments, his values. It had stripped away the illusions he had clung to and left him with something raw but real, himself. This, he realized, was the true opportunity hidden within the pain. Rejection wasn't about the other person's decision. It was about his response. It was about how he chose to grow, to redefine himself, to find strength in his own company. There is a dark beauty in this realization. Pain, when embraced with courage and curiosity, becomes a tool for transformation. Stoicism doesn't promise a life free from rejection or suffering. Instead, it offers a framework for navigating these challenges with grace and strength. It reminds us that our worth isn't determined by others, that we are not at the mercy of external events, and that even the deepest wounds can heal and leave us stronger. As Daniel closed his eyes that night, he felt something he hadn't felt in weeks: peace. The rejection still hurt, but it no longer defined him. He saw it now for what it was, a moment of clarity, a chance to let go of what no longer served him and step into a version of himself that was freer, stronger, and more self-aware. Rejection hadn't broken him, it had taught him, and in that realization, he found the power to move forward. Rejection, then, is not the end. It's the beginning of a deeper journey. It is a test of our ability to adapt, to reflect, and to grow. As the Stoics remind us, the greatest victories are not won in comfort, but in struggle. And perhaps the greatest victory of all is reclaiming our power in the face of pain, standing tall in the face of rejection, and realizing that we are enough, always, in every moment, without question. If this message resonated with you and sparked a moment of clarity, Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more empowering content like this. Your support helps us create more deep dives into the truths of life and human psychology. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And let's keep growing stronger together.